Endometriosis happens when those endometrial cells that typically grow inside the uterus that create the tissue that we shed during menstruation decide to grow outside the uterus and in other places such as along the ovaries, your bladder, your bowel and pelvic walls, even your lungs, brain, and clitoris in rare cases. But even though that kind of free-range endometrial tissue is not where it belongs, it still behaves as if it's inside the uterus, which means that every month when we get our periods, that endometrial tissue, regardless of where it is, still tries to shed and bleed, but the blood has nowhere to go. That can lead to all sorts of things like ovarian cysts, blocked fallopian tubes, scar tissues, adhesions, internal bleeding, and a lot of chronic pain. In other words, endometriosis, a massive jerk. But all of those recurrent and unpleasant, to say the least, symptoms are just the beginning of why endometriosis really sucks. Endometriosis affects a whopping 10% of people with uteruses around the globe, and yet it's relatively overlooked within the medical community, receiving scant funding in proportion to its scale and annual treatment costs. Part of its medical marginalization has to do with clinical sexism. It was formerly blamed on women delaying marriage and having kids into their 30s, thus earning it the nickname the career woman's disease. Excuse me? Making it basically like God's punishment for feminism. What? But the real reason women have historically been diagnosed with endometriosis in their 30s isn't because we're all little Melanie Griffith working girls running around, but because it takes an average 10 years and over 5 doctors to get a correct diagnosis. Well, it could be appendicitis or ovarian cysts or pelvic inflammatory disease or irritable bowel syndrome. I mean, really anything. Your guess is as good as mine. Partially because it's often left untreated for so long, endometriosis is one of the top 3 causes of infertility. Endometriosis can impact not only yourself, but also people you love, due to factors like 59% of women with endometriosis experiencing painful intercourse, not to mention having to recurrently manage extremely painful and even debilitating symptoms. So understandably, it can create and even amplify relationship stress. But I do think one thing we can all do is talk about it more so that the millions of people out there suffering from endometriosis don't have to do so in silence, and so that doctors and the medical research community have no choice but to pay attention. Support your local uteruses, y'all. Tape on my lip. How long has that been there?